What is the scariest folklore story you have ever heard? Part 2. Story 1. There's a place I visit when I spend time with my grandparents in Colombia. This place is called Puerto Colombia, or San Benila to the locals. And to get there, you need to hop on this tight 2-lane highway. My grandpa would tell my brothers and me stories about the region. My favorite was El Cuento de la Mujer de Blanco, aka The Tale of the Woman in White. My grandpa tells of a time, a weekend in his youth, I believe he said in his early 20s, and this was back in the mid-40s, mind you. He needed to make a trip to San Benila to pick up supplies for his father's factory. He left in the morning, arrived at the pickup site, and decided to stay for lunch and to catch up with the production folks on that end. On his drive back home, however, he says, when this gets topsy-turvy, he gets back on the highway at near the evening time. You can imagine how dark that highway is in the 1940s. He describes barely being able to see the road ahead of him, but as he rounded a bend shortly into his drive, something he saw in his headlights caused him to freeze to the bone. Ahead of him, he saw a woman standing on the side of the road. He says she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, wearing a simple white cloth dress that seemed to almost glow to him. He stopped his car next to her and asked if she needed help. She doesn't say anything as she approaches the truck and attempts to open the door. My grandpa calmly opens the door to let her in, and she sits next to him. He describes a certain feeling of dread, because as a boy, he had heard the stories too, and he needed to be very careful. He asks her, "Pa donde, señor?" Where to, miss? He says she spoke very softly, but enough for him to hear where she wanted to go. Grandpa says she didn't say a word after that. She just kept staring at him silently. My grandpa knew the stories very well, and he was able to keep calm. He drops her off about 90 minutes later and says the moment he pulled away and checked his mirrors, she was gone. Totally disappeared. La Mujer de Blanco. Grandpa says the legend goes something like this. She presents herself to lone men that drive that highway at night. He's not sure if she's a ghost or demon, but she has a simple request, just a lift to a church. And you better take her, because if not, if you try to get smart with her, try and come on to her or try and take advantage of her quiet disposition, well, Grandpa says it doesn't end well for the man. He says there have been dozens of cases where men have been found killed in their extremely violent highway. Many more people also report picking up this woman and taking her to the church in our town. The story I often hear is that she was on her way to get married on that road before it was a highway to go to San Benila. And on the way, she was abducted by road pirates. I'm not sure how to describe them in English, but they're essentially bandits that stalk roads and highways. She was supposedly killed horrifically, and this is why she exacts revenge on the unworthy men that come across her. The story has always fascinated me as a kid. Just wanted to share. And remember, take her to the church. I feel like this is a story that is just about being nice to women, something you should already do. But definitely if the woman is a vengeful ghost who will kill you if you're not. Not sure if I should say girl power or be terrified. Story 2. England has a very old legend about a spirit called the Wild Hunt. Essentially, it is a group of spirits led by the Reaper himself, driving a large black carriage, led by 4 black draft horses. They travel the English countryside seeking out lost souls or wanderers or people that have lost their way. When they find someone, the hunt begins with the culmination of the lost soul being captured and either conscripted into the hunt for eternity or dragged to the underworld. My story. When I was about 12 years old, I had an intense passion for reading and learning all I could about ghosts and the paranormal. Every time I visited the library, I would come home with at least 3 or 4 books on the subject. One night, I had the most vivid dream I have ever experienced. Also, it was the last dream I ever had. Or at least, I haven't been able to remember dreaming since, and I am 42 years old now. Anyhow, in the dream, I was riding in the back of a cab down a dark country road right at night. Trees stretching over the road like a canopy. For some reason, I knew I was in England. I'm from the USA, never been to England yet. The cab approached a curve in the road beyond which there was a very unnatural light. We made the curve, and there in the road was an old man with a lantern screaming, "Turn back! Turn back!" I remember laughing and telling the driver to continue on around him, which he did. As we passed him, I watched the old man go by. As soon as the rear of the car got even with him, he disappeared. A bit later in the dream, we approached another curve. Again, an unnatural light. A butterfly feeling in my gut telling me something wasn't right. We made the curve, and this time in the middle of the road, forcing the cab to stop, was an enormous black carriage lit by 4 torches at the corners, and led by 4 humongous black horses. The fog is so thick at ground level, I can't see their hooves. I was beginning to panic and looked out the window to the left. To my horror, out of the fog was rising an army of the dead. Quickly, I turned back to the driver and told him to get us the hell out of there. He turned to look back at me and was missing half of his face. Immediately, I flung open the car door and jumped from the cab. The last thing I remember was a skeletal hand grab my shoulder. I woke with a scream stuck in my throat and drenched in sweat, knowing that I had just died in my dream. The freaky part here is, I knew nothing of the wild hunt until a week later when I came across a story in one of the books I brought home from the library. Can't remember the title, but it was a very old copy of a book on ghosts and legends from England. Still freaks me out. Strange also how I haven't been able to recall a dream since. I've read so many stories and books surrounding the wild hunt, and they're all scary. I can't imagine being forced out of your bed and then chased for your life, as happens in the original tale, especially by spirits who never tire. Story 3. I've been reading a lot of folklore over the years. Honestly, none of it really holds a candle to what humans actually do, but that's beside the point for this. There's an old Scottish legend about Glamis Castle. Supposedly in 1821, the Lord and Lady of Glamis had a son. According to the official report, the boy was called Thomas Lyon Bowes, Master of the Glamis, and he died the day he was born. So far, all of this is provable and on record. And in fact, they were the great-grandparents of Elizabeth Bowes Lyon, more commonly known as Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, Queen Consort to King George of England. However, according to the legend, Thomas didn't die. He lived, but as he grew, he became more and more deformed, being described as half frog, half man. His mental faculties seemed to be up for debate. Supposedly, he was put into a secret room in the central tower, the door bricked up with only a way to pass food left open. This is actually more plausible than you might think, because the castle is a 15th century fortification, and in some places, that tower's walls are 16 feet thick. Some rumors say the room was originally a safe room or a strong room. Allegedly in the 1850s, when Thomas would have been somewhere between 29 and 39, when the next Earl's wife asked her guests to help her put things to rest once and for all. While her husband was out on a hunt, she had them all run from room to room, opening the windows and hanging something out of them. A towel, sheet, handkerchief, etc., to prove that they knew all the windows and the walls. Supposedly, there was a window. In some versions, 4 windows, which once they were done, remained closed with no marker. The Earl returned before anything else could happen, berated his wife, and promptly divorced her. The divorce is another fact that's on the record. She died in Italy years later. The interesting thing is that if this were true, then all of the official descendants of the First Lord were usurpers. The monster was actually the legal heir, but he spent his life hidden in a room. There are also some more fanciful versions which say that as well as being deformed, he was also somehow ageless or immortal, and that he still lives in that castle room to this day. See, this is a story that actually makes me feel bad, because the poor guy just happened to be born a little differently, and yet he was treated like a monster. I feel so sad for the poor guy. It sounds like his family were the true monsters. Story 4. This one only became creepy because of a coincidental experience I had related to it. There are legends of a creature called Black Shuck, or more generally, hellhound. Most legends about it say that you will die a horrible death if you see it 3 times. Basically, it's a large black dog with glowing red eyes. I learned of this from an old Animal Planet show called Lost Tapes, which was basically Blair Witch Projects, but with cryptids. Several years ago on New Year's Eve, all the adults in the family dropped all the kids off at our house, so they could go down the street for an adults-only party. While most of my cousins were playing in my sister's room, a couple others and I were out in the living room playing video games. At one point, I hear my dog scratching at the door to come back inside, so I get up to let her in. She bolts past me into the other end of the house, so I look back outside, figuring she got spooked by a raccoon or something. What I actually saw was an enormous dog that was absolutely covered with long, dark hair, walking around the back of the yard. This thing was easily twice the size of our dog, a golden retriever. And needless to say, my cousins and I freaked the hell out and started yelling, which I guess spooked the huge dog as well, and it proceeded to leap over the fence in one bound. We were pretty shaken out of fear for my dog's safety, but thankfully she was unhurt, and I didn't really think much of the event. That is until I saw this dog a second time less than a week later while I was walking home from a friend's house late one night. Seeing it froze me in my tracks for a good minute. Thankfully, it was far away and ended up wandering off in the opposite direction of my house. Roughly a month after this encounter, The Lost Tapes episode about hellhounds premiered. Nobody ever figured out what happened to the dog because we never saw it again after that. Story 5. My parents have some pretty interesting ones. Both are Haitian and took place in Haiti. My father was never the type to believe paranormal stuff. He's not even religious. There's always stories about voodoo priests being able to hypnotize people, which he attributes to devil's breath. There was one night, however, that he had no explanation for. There was this house with some farmland behind it. He and his 17, yes, that many, brothers and sisters were told to never talk to the people inside. One night, he was coming home from a party, had a buzz on, and saw someone standing on the porch. Just out of politeness, he wished her a good evening. He was kind of offended that she didn't say anything back, but found himself staring into the farm in the back. He definitely saw a group of people working the grounds, and when one looked up at him, the person's eyes were red. My pop's older brother caught him staring and started frantically yelling at him to run. That's when he finally snapped out of his trance and hoofed it as well. He's tried many times to put the pieces together as to what would cause something like that, but never could. The one that really freaks me out is my mom's story. My uncle, her youngest brother, had a string of illnesses when he was really young, maybe around 3 years old. One illness was so bad that my grandparents had to visit several hospitals. All of them couldn't pinpoint what was making him so ill. I guess he must have been nearing death for my family to consider getting a voodoo doctor. He had everyone in the house wear red, and the kids were separated from the room where my uncle was in. She doesn't remember much about the ritual, but she distinctly remembers hearing a male voice from my uncle's room scream, "I'm leaving," and that was it. He was completely fine afterward. He's so healthy now that at age 50, he looks like he's 30, lol. Story 6. In college, I had a Navajo roommate who told me about skinwalkers and some supposedly first-hand experiences he and his family had. So much of the skinwalker stories you hear about online or on TV shows are just like ghost stories. Spooky tapping on your door and roof at night, trying to get you outside so the boogeyman can get you. They're evil spirits and witch doctors out to get you. The story he told was so much more personal and real sounding. According to his story, skinwalkers do their thing against Navajo Christians who've forsaken their ancestors. They can put curses on you that can leave you suffering from mystery illnesses for months. They specifically wear furs of predator animals to turn into them, which was taboo in the culture. This is all secondhand from 5+ years ago. Forgive me if my details are sketchy. The way you can tell a skinwalker from a normal person is that their eyes reflect like an animal. To become one, you have to have that shamanistic magical knowledge, but then do something truly vile, like necrophilia. Normally you wouldn't talk about this stuff, because they'd know and send curses your way. But he was on the East Coast, probably a safe enough distance, he figured. He had an antidote where his brother would go to and from work down a trail in the woods, until he started to see bloody bear and wolf skins nailed to trees and hear whispers in the trees. They threatened to curse him and have him killed, trying to scare him off from using that path. He kept going down that path, reciting Christian prayers as he went each day, until the skinwalkers were warded off. I talked about skinwalkers in the first video, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. But I mentioned they're one of my biggest fears since they look like regular animals. I'm a big animal person, so the idea of me going to pet a cute puppy and it turns out to be a monster, yeah, that sounds like a way that I would go. Story 7. I don't know that this is folklore per se, but it's an old story and it gives me the willies. This may be a little inaccurate as it's been years since I read it. The story goes that this family living out in the mountains goes on a hunt, sees a pair of mountain lions, and manages to shoot one of them. It's a handsome big animal, so they decide to have it stuffed. But this being a rural area, they don't have the best access to supplies and wind up using glass buttons for eyes. Maybe a week afterward, their farm comes under attack and the chickens start disappearing nightly. Nothing works. No bait, no traps, nothing they try has any success. Somebody finally sits up one night with a gun and sees that the culprit is a mountain lion. No amount of bullets seem to have any effect though. It goes right in, grabs the chicken, and runs back out unscathed. The frequent attacks really hit them hard and nothing they do about it works. It starts attacking during the day and scares the family. Finally, the mother blames the menfolk for killing that big, beautiful mountain lion and thinks that its companion must be seeking revenge for its death. At her insistence, they leave the stuffed cat outside. The next day, there isn't an attack. But when they go outside, they see a pair of mountain lions standing together in the distance at the edge of the woods. As the two cats vanish into the forest, the bigger one looks back at them briefly, and they see that it has glass buttons instead of eyes. Story 8. Our skunk is pretty creepy. To summarize it, it's staying inside for 24 hours and heading out to the woods at 12 o'clock in the morning, on January 1st to see what's gonna happen this year. You must not talk to anyone, drink, or eat. You can't even look at anyone until you head out at 12. Once you are out there, you have to go to a church to renounce your religion. Pagans were converted to Catholic, so they temporarily renounced Catholicism. Once you do this, you can now go try to see the future. The problem is that now you're exposed to supernatural forces capable of killing you, or worse. These fun faces include the Brook Horse, who drowns people and steals their soul, the Huldra, who will make it so travelers never return by killing them or marrying them, and others who will try to distract you. You must not be scared either. Breaking any of these rules would come with dire consequences. You could go insane, be mutilated, or just disappear. The reward is pretty nice though. You get a good glimpse of the future. You're alerted to marriage, war, fires, how well your crops will do, and most importantly, death. Many people did this to find out who would die in the coming year. During the walk, you could see new graves, visions through the keyhole of a church, and even a funeral procession. It's pretty cool, and even if you don't see anything, you get a nice walk in the woods. I want to try it someday, maybe a couple years from now, because of how unique and unusual it seems. Story 9. Some of the indigenous Australian dreaming tales are terrifying. My father told us about a Khadija man, a man like the rest of us, but righteous to the point that he has excess skills far better than the best of us. As a result of this power, he is imbued with the position of punisher and healer. Some of his skills include leaving no tracks, being able to travel faster and better than the rest of us, and being able to sing you to death. If you have chosen to do the wrong thing, and maybe you're going to be punished with a spear through your right thigh, he could also speak to you anywhere with the knowledge of how to spear you, with or without killing you. Now, out of fear of the punishment, you may think to yourself, I will outrun him. He is just a man, and I am just a man. So you should be careful to cover your marks and not leave a trail. You could go for a day, through creeks and rivers, over and around hills, etc., to evade him. The thing is that every time you stop there, he appears already standing there, not tired, not thirsty, and not hungry, just waiting till you can't run anymore. You have to admit to yourself that you have to take the punishment, just like you chose to do the wrong thing too. I was very frightened of the Khadija man when I was young, and as a middle-aged woman now, I still would not want him after me, as there is no avoiding it. Story 10. The Santa Campana from Galicia in northwestern Spain is a procession of dead souls that roams the forest on winter nights. You can see their faint outlines in the fog, and they are led by a living person, carrying a lit candle to lead the way and a cauldron. This person has been cursed into leading them and will spend their nights roaming the countryside leading the dead, until they die of exhaustion, because they remember nothing when they wake up in their beds the morning after. The only way for a cursed person to lift his curse is to run into another living person and pass them the candle and cauldron. If you run into the Santa Campana, there are a few things you can do to prevent being cursed, such as getting into a church or drawing a circle around you with an olive tree branch. When I was a kid and went out for a walk late in the evening, my gran would remind me to grab an olive stalk and bring it with me, in case I ran into them. Also the madamas, evil spirits in the shape of an impossibly beautiful woman who lives in caves underground, protecting great treasures. If you go to a cave where a madama lives at dawn, you can see her coming out with her comb to comb her long blonde hair. She will ask you to come with her and become her husband underground, but you must refuse. Those who know the legend know that her beautiful comb is made of human bone. This seems like another story where the best thing to do is just walk away, no matter how hot they might be. It's called Go Home and Watch a Megan Fox movie or something. Story 11. Here in Scotland, I was told about changelings as a little kid. The wee folk. Fairies are nasty in Scottish stories. Swap your baby with one of theirs so you feed and raise it for them. The baby will look just like yours, so it's hard to tell. I heard to defeat them, you have to do something very strange. Like prepare a dinner for everyone, but in an eggshell, and act like nothing is off. Or act like you're sweeping the floor, but sweep dirt into the room from outside. And act as though you're proud of your clean house. Then you leave the room and peek through. And if you hear the baby talking to itself out loud in an adult voice, wondering why you would do such an odd thing, you're to run into the room, grab the baby, and throw it in a body of water. Then the wee folk will run out to save it from drowning and drop your baby in the rush, and you can get them back. I think this was a story to stop neglectful parents leaving their babies all by themselves for too long. Story 12. Wales is full of stories of weird and wonderful shit. If you like dragons, magic, and men dressed as women stealing babies for the changelings, you need to look into Welsh folklore and myths. My personal favorite and a story from where I grew up. Bobby Ellar is Saft, or a baby down the shaft. They say that a woman who fell pregnant out of wedlock was forced into having the child in secret and made to take the newborn to the caves and mines in the mountain. They left the child there to die in the caverns. After that, the local people say they could hear the wails and cries of a baby echo through the village. The young mother, heartbroken and distraught, wandered the streets after the echoing cries in hopes that by some small miracle, she could be reunited with the baby. She succumbed to the cold of the winter night and died also. Now, it's said that on particularly cold nights you can hear a baby cry. And if you wait long enough, you'll hear the young mother wail and sob in the wind too.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.